Hello and welcome to Atheists Talk. I'm Minnesota Atheist Associate President Stephanie Zvan. My guests today are August Berkshire, past president and board member at Minnesota Atheists, Reverend David Dr. Breeden from the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, and Scott Lohman, the president, seemingly for life, of the Humanists of Minnesota. Today we'll be discussing the current trend toward establishing godless congregations. Working to establish atheist and humanist services around the U.S. seems to be the latest trend in godlessness. That doesn't mean it's new, of course. Unitarians have long had services with little or no reference to deities. Ethical culture explicitly identifies as a deity-free religion, and they're over 100 years old. The difference now is that other organizations are actively working toward building new communities centered around atheism, essentially godless churches. So let's talk about what this might mean for Minnesota. Now, August and Scott, your organizations don't offer anything that resembles church services. What kind of meeting opportunities do you offer members? Atheist one?
Okay, well, we have educational meetings where we educate ourselves, like in our monthly meetings, and we also had a regional atheist conference the past 2 years. We also educate the public by going to schools, giving talks on atheism. We have lots of social events, Blasphemers Brunch, Free Thinking Females, Godless Gamers. We do charitable events, such as Feeding the Hungry at homeless shelters, where we go, I think, like every 6 weeks and cook meals for them. We have a TV and radio show for outreach there. And we do political lobbying at the state capitol, lobbying on state church issues. And this year we're going to even be proposing a change in the law to allow atheist leaders to conduct civil marriages. One of the other social things we did for the last 2 years is sponsoring an Aints game. The St. Paul Saints baseball team we converted to the Mr. Paul Aints, and had hundreds of atheists show up for that.
Scott, how about the Humanists?
Humanists have monthly meetings. We will have different speakers on different topics. And in the last 3 years, we've been having lunch where we'll cater in for people to then fellowship and talk after our monthly meeting. We do sponsor part of the radio program, and so occasionally are contributing to that. We do produce our own cable TV program. We have a monthly newsletter. We do fundraisers for two things right now during the year. One is for the Food Shelf Network, so we just raise cash for them on that part of it, and then we also do a fundraiser for Camp Quest, which is the summer camp for atheist, humanist, and free-thinking kids. So we've got outreach in that, plus we then have a smattering of monthly meetings. We'll have TED Talk meetings where they'll pick one of those topics and listen to that and discuss it. Some book clubs also. We have a poetry night on that, and some pub meetings. So we have a wide variety of meetings and gatherings as well.
All right. Now, David, the Unitarian Society is, I think, most like the traditional church, certainly far more than the atheist or humanist groups' meetings. And it isn't explicitly atheist, although it does have a lot of atheist members. How does your society make atheists feel comfortable and welcomed to what are essentially church services?
That is interesting because, yes, if you show up on Sunday morning, we have hymns. We have a talk, which might even look like a sermon. We have quiet time that might look like prayer. But First Unitarian Society has been mostly atheist since 1916, when John Dietrich became the first person to talk about religious humanism as a minister. And I would say that we are one of the oldest mostly atheist congregations in the world, as a matter of fact, because when the First Unitarian Society was founded, most of the members were Scandinavian, and those Scandinavians were very tired of their state church, and they were ready to be atheists. And so when they heard about this guy, John Dietrich, who was talking about this thing called humanism, and he had been defrocked as a minister for heresy and blasphemy, they said, that's the guy for us. And that was 1916, so it's been a while.
So are there differences between your services and regular church services aside from mentioning God or gods?
Well, basically the Protestant style of service. We don't have any religious iconography or anything like that whatsoever, even in the building. maybe in a book somewhere there's a Virgin Mary, but other than that, it doesn't appear anywhere. But we do have the usual church service kinds of things like music and coffee hour afterward and those kinds of things. So I think a Methodist could probably show up, and if they weren't real observant, they might not notice that God didn't appear in the service.
I do, in fact, actually, I have met a minister. I can't say a whole lot about what she's doing right now, but she is an atheist, as she discovered, was in a very liberal church and has been moving her services more and more toward simply eliminating God from the services. And she's considering talking to her congregation, who hasn't seemed to complain about this, about going to being an atheist congregation. So,
all right, more power to her.
Yes.
She can join in.
Yes.
Sneaking that stuff
That's
past them.
right.
I'm hoping that becomes successful so we can actually talk more about what she's doing at some point. So, August and Scott, you have a lot of ex-religious people in your organizations. Do you ever get complaints that any parts of your meetings feel too much like church services? Or just
really
meeting
haven't.
as a group?
Well, yeah, you get that, oh, you're meeting, so you must be like a church, because churches meet, and well, but there's so many groups that meet. I mean, to say that just the mere fact of meeting makes you like a church, I think is ridiculous. We have educational meetings, and where you get to question the speaker, which did not happen when I grew up as a Roman Catholic. So we have plenty of Q&A, and they're educational. We learn something.
Yeah, ours are almost could be looked at as more of like class. You're coming to hear a lecture on a topic, and we'll talk about things that we're doing. But yeah, we get lots of Q&A for our speakers. They don't get out without getting thoroughly questioned on that part of it. We only had objections for people thinking we were churchy when actually we were meeting at First Unitarian Society, and we have a couple of members here and there that even think First Unitarian Society is a little too churchy for them. So that was the only time we ran into things, but other than that, we could look like a college classroom.
And do you ever get members saying that they miss anything about their church services?
There are some of that actually on our side, because humanists, we are closer in the spectrum to Unitarians, because we've got religious humanists that are in there, which are what some Unitarians can consider themselves, although when you get to those definitions, you start to get in serious arguments with humanists on just where people fall on that spectrum. But there are those that like those type of services, that like that traditional sort of Sunday morning feel, but want it without all of the silly God talk. So, you know, they'll go to that, and we attract a little more overlap with the Unitarians. So we'll get the ones that come to us that like the intellectual side, but then they get their sort of religious side taken care of on the Unitarian side.
August?
And I'd say our members don't miss any aspect of the service, but they do want the social aspects that a church often provides. And so we've worked to have many social events for our members.
So David, for those who haven't attended one of your services, we've talked a little bit about music and the tradition and that sort of thing. Are there other services that you feel your congregation offers that more traditional atheist or humanist groups don't?
Well, we definitely offer the weddings and the and memorial services, and in our tradition, we celebrate a life well lived. We don't preach anyone into heaven because we don't think there's one there, and we don't talk about an afterlife, but we certainly talk about living a life fully, and the same is true with our wedding and commitment ceremonies. They're can be very formal in high church, and again, people don't even notice that God didn't appear in that particular ceremony.
One of the traditional functions of clergy has also been counseling. Does your congregation offer anything like that?
Oh yes, we are much closer, I think, to the norm in terms of what churches offer in terms of pastoral counseling and even something that we might even call spiritual direction. So, because we do walk that fine line between, because many Unitarian Universalists are not necessarily humanists or atheists. And and we have a lot of mixed couples who we have an atheist and a theist, for example. And so we have to walk a relatively fine line between those two.
And I just want to bring up that humanists have a little bit of overlap with that, in which there are humanist celebrants who do same thing, only independently of being able to marry and perform other ceremonies. And we have several within our group and have links to the AHA and others statewide. And they've actually been quite busy lately, which is very cool.
And we've even had humanist celebrants in our building
There you go.
doing some wonderful, especially with military,
Yeah.
same-sex military couples. It's been great because the humanists have been offering free marriage ceremonies for same-sex couples, and hey, go for that, right?
There you go.
Pretty cool.
And that's a quirk of Minnesota law, that if you're a member of a religious clergy, you can perform a civil marriage. And of course, First Unitarian Society is registered as a religion, 501c3 religious. Humanists of Minnesota, you're registered as an educational group, but through the AHA,
Through the AHA is
they have
how.
a religious
Yep.
avenue.
Yeah, they have this really odd quirks of the law that allows the celebrants to be able to be certified or whatever it is that.
And so for Minnesota Atheists, we don't have any religion, we don't aspire to any religion. And so we're trying to change the law to have atheist marriage celebrants be able to, as well, conduct civil marriages.
But as you mentioned, there may be a few clergy out there who actually are atheists who are fronting, but
Right, but they're getting the authority to conduct a marriage through a religion.
right. Yes. Well, and also military chaplaincy has been
Yeah.
an issue for you as well. But we're with you in that fight.
Yeah.
So I've already heard a little bit of talk about overlap between your various groups. How much would you each characterize there as being? So I expect there's a fair amount of overlap between humanists and Unitarian, at least your Unitarian congregation, even if not Unitarians. Any idea how great a degree that is?
No, I don't know. It'll vary. I mean, there is going to be some percentage. We might be like a third, say, of my group that are members of that, because we're still providing something that they don't do, and then they just are doing something we don't do. What I've noticed sort of nationwide is that humanist groups, their size varies depending on the size of a more humanist Unitarian society in those types of cities. Those ones with basically no, say secular or humanist style Unitarians have larger humanist chapters, and those with bigger Unitarian humanist societies will have smaller humanist chapters.
Right.
And Scott and August, any idea how much overlap there is between?
I think there's a lot of overlap between Minnesota Atheists and the Humanists of Minnesota, and some with the Unitarians. One of our board members is very active in her Unitarian church,
Yes.
for example. I see a lot of overlap in our groups. Speaking now specifically of the First Unitarian Society, not all UU. I think we all just believe in the same gods. Some of you members may call themselves religious humanists, but they're operating like atheists. And so we're all atheistic, and we all realize the fact that atheism is not enough. Okay, you dump the gods, now how are you going to live your life? And that's where we need the humanism. And I think that's something we all share.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so the Twin Cities are an anomaly in the United States because the Unitarian Universalist churches that have developed have been odd in that some have remained very theistic, and First Unitarian Society has remained very untheistic over time, and it's an anomaly, but it has to do with the liberalism of the Twin Cities, I think.
So how have your various models worked for you over time? Particularly over the last decade, atheism is becoming more mainstream. Do you find your groups growing? Do you find that people are feeling like their needs are met?
Well, we're experiencing growth for us. We've just moved to a new location after meeting in one place that we've now outgrown the space. And this year we have added childcare to be available at our monthly meetings. So we now can start appealing to a much younger crowd. When I joined the group, it really was a lot of angry old white guys, because that was pretty much all that was showing up. And I was one of the almost youngest active members, and I was not young when I joined. But now we're starting to see that, and even having, our board is now balanced 50-50 male-female on that. So we're seeing those type of changes, and that affects then those things that we're bringing in. But we're also now finally able to bring in a younger demographic, which we had not seen in our group in a long time.
I've seen the atheist and humanist groups thriving locally and throughout the country. And it all started with the rise of the best-selling atheists, the Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens. And it's kind of been like, it's been atheism that's unloosed the genie, and it's been atheism that's been the rising tide that has lifted all boats. And when you look at the young people, of our three groups, we attract the youngest crowd that made the atheist, because the young people are not as afraid of the word atheist. You go on Facebook, you go on the internet, you see the young people using atheist all the time. So I think atheism is a word that we can all start to embrace more than we have. I think even the outstate groups, there's a group that just started in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, not Michigan, Minnesota. And at my urging, they put the A word in their title, so they're the Grand Rapids Atheists and Freethinkers. And they get along fine, no problem. And that used to be like deathly to do that in
that part of the state,
greater Minnesota.
Yeah.
But no, they're in the Brainerd group is starting to use the word atheist in their meetups, and they're almost disappointed they got no backlash. So it's a word that groups like Minnesota Atheists is trying to rehabilitate by being civil atheists and friendly atheists, and I think we've succeeded. But we've also, as atheists, have always Minnesota Atheists practiced humanism. Now, some atheists are calling that atheism plus, sort of atheism plus doing good works. And I really see no difference between atheism plus and secular humanism. They seem like the same thing to me. So atheists are realizing that it's not enough just to get rid of God. That doesn't automatically make you a good person. You really have to think through a lifestyle and a morality based on evolution, based on secular experience.
So David, how about you? You're not explicitly atheist. Are you also benefiting from the rise of atheism?
Young people are pouring in right now. Of course, the Unitarian Universalist side of things has the religious education and Sunday school. And a lot of people joke that Unitarians are only atheists with children. So the Sunday school, quote unquote, is thriving. But I think, it's absolutely true that those of us who remember the Cold War and that atheists were against everything American, we have to have white hair at this point, right? And so there's a new generation that has absolutely no baggage in that way whatsoever, and they are pouring in.
And do you think young people coming in is where your biggest opportunities are, or do you see opportunities for meeting other demographics that you maybe haven't so far?
Well, I think we're all trying to reach out to all demographics. Right. But it's obviously easier to approach someone who's already an atheist, which is more likely to be a young person, than to try to convert somebody, so to speak. I've often realized that it's a lot, in the time it would take me to convert one person to atheism, I could go out and find 10 people that are already atheists. And the person who I would try to be converting wouldn't appreciate being converted anyway, so just let them be and go out and find the like-minded atheists that are already there.
And I do know our area is also attracting some recovering fundamentalist people that can help with coming out of even, the more controlling of the fundamental religions. And we've got a group that's active here that's getting a little braver to hang out with those atheists and humanists.
Yep.
So that's cool, but there's for them it's a lot more work for people coming out of a controlling religion, especially after some of them been in it for decades.
Well, and Unitarians, I mean, Darwin's wife said that Unitarianism is the feather bed on which atheists will fall, right? So we will always attract those people who are leaving churches, but they're not quite ready to totally exit the whole system of churches.
So do any of you feel that there is more room for godless congregations, say, in Minneapolis? There's a group going around now called Sunday Assembly, which is a couple of all things, comedians from the UK who are working on starting at groups around the US. And I know that they've approached some people here in Minnesota, although they haven't been pushing very hard. They don't seem to be doing that. But they've started up congregations in New York and Boston. Do you think there's room for more congregations, more styles, or do you think most of the opportunities are, say, geographic, moving outside of Minneapolis?
On that, it's sometimes when I talk with Jerry DeWitt, who is a guy from Louisiana who basically did a very public deconversion and discovered he got totally ostracized because in his part of the country, church was like the third question somebody would ask you is, what's your name, where do you live, and what church are you part of? And that he discovered that there was a hole and a tough place for them. So they're in some parts of the country with some different culture than we have here in Minnesota. That's a help for them because they probably wouldn't have any Unitarian societies and they're not quite ready to go cold turkey on that. And they're working on creating, sort of Sunday assemblies, even sort of Pentecostal style that are a little more, rowdy than we humanists ever think about doing something like that, especially Minnesota humanists on that part of it. So I think it provides a need, but he's even said it doesn't fit everybody's needs on that part, but he does say that he wasn't finding that in our community to help with sort of people coming from those aspects.
See, I think between our three groups, we have the full spectrum covered.
Yeah.
And I don't think a Sunday assembly would add anything to what we're already providing. But on the other hand, when I heard about this idea of Sunday assembly, I thought, well, that's as if we combined all three groups.
Yeah.
Which got me thinking that maybe that's not such a bad idea.
Yeah. Well, yes, they're explicitly atheists, but they're not negative about it. They're not argumentative about it. It's like, okay, God's not here, but we're going to have a good time, and we're going to have music. And I invited Sanderson Jones as the guy of the group, and I invited him. I said, just don't come in the winter, but otherwise you'll love Minneapolis.
That's why he hasn't been. Okay.
We're approaching winter.
Yes.
But I think he would be totally welcome here. He does use the F-bomb once in a while, I understand, but other than
When you
that.
bring up the negative atheism, that's a change Minnesota Atheists consciously made about a dozen years ago, is to get away from the ranting and raving and ridiculing, and just to talk positively about what we have to offer. And if you're attracted to it, fine, and if not, fine, just don't use the government to put your religion on us.
Yeah, I think that's the great mistake that that the minister at my congregation made back in 1916, is he thought that he could convert people and change the world by making everyone atheist, and so he was very in your face about it, and that just got a lot of negative baggage around it. And we have a positive message, and that's what we need to remember now. It's not about fighting the Pope. It's just about waiting till people realize the truth of what's going on,
Now, I know Minnesota Atheists has been making a couple of moves towards meetings and events where people could participate a bit more, have a bit more talk. So we added workshops to our conference. We're talking about we're doing a meeting this month that actually involves people getting together and doing debates. Are you making, Scott and David, are you guys making plans or do things already to get people more involved in the more intellectual side?
With some of our meetings, we've had place where instead of having the speaker take questions, we have the speaker come in and give us 10 questions for people to talk about. So then they're put at the table, and then the small groups will discuss among themselves those very issues and then report back. So it varies. We've done multiple different formats on that to keep people interacting and talking instead of just listening and then questioning.
Well, Scott is going to be at a thing we call the Forum. We have two things on Sunday morning, the Forum and then our Sunday Assembly. And I would like to, sue these folks in London for, for copyright infringement. We invented that. But anyway, so he's going to get a good grilling, I guarantee him, in the last 15 minutes of his talk on Sunday morning. And the Forum is given over to that the lecture and then the grilling, the very serious questions. The Sunday morning format, we don't do that, but we often do then have something after the service in terms of talking about the sermon. So.
And do all of you find that helps undercut some of the issues with authority that people who have come out of other religions have?
I think Minnesota Atheists has had authoritarian leaders in the past, and we instituted term limits on the presidency, which is one reason I'm no longer president, but I'm also happy to turn it over to other people, and I hope someday you'll be president. I'll put my plug in now. So I think term limits has helped to disperse power, and we're always looking for new leaders, and I think meetups has been a good way to create it, and I think our discussion this month will be a good way to find some more leaders.
Yeah, and we just look to increase participation on that. We still have a very democratic structure in terms of both our board as well as that. People just need to be a member for a year, and they can go up for election on the board. The officer positions are up every year, and we do also have term limits built into our Constitution as well. We've also seen our group move past having the founders of the group haven't been active in our structure for a number of years. So we found a way for the group to move itself forward by moving in new people and then allowing change and people to move on. So we've managed to survive that. Some groups don't necessarily survive, or it's a tough transition when you start seeing founders feeling there not being something going on and don't want to give up.
David, we just have a moment left. Anything to add to that?
I do talk on Sunday morning, but I am very aware, as is my congregation, that I am not the big guy who has all the answers.
All right.
Yeah.
August, Scott, David, thank you all very much for being here. I'm Stephanie Zvan. I'm Associate President of the Minnesota Atheists. This is our newsletter. If you wish to get a copy of the newsletter, you can go to our website and just sign up and get a copy of this, get a copy of our Atheist Weekly email that gives you all sorts of information about events that we have, all sorts of events, and actually about events that the Humanists have as well.
Exactly.
So we hope you'll tune in and take care of that, or get informed on that, and find something that works for all of you in terms of what you do with your Sunday morning or any other day.